This video is going to talk about lost profits using the Mississippi Chemical Corp case. The underlying cause of action actually being both contract, right? Breach of express warranty, implied warranties of merchantability and fitness of a particular purpose, as well as torts, which is the negligent design. Timeline wise, of when MCC sued and what MCC requested was a little bit complicated. So let's go ahead and just break down what happened. In 1989, MCC bought a compressor to produce ammonia from Dresser, the defendant, and the sales contract contained an express warranty guaranteeing that the compressor train would be free from defects and comport with certain technical specifications. So they purposely purchased this product that would meet their needs. But in April 1990, about a year later, their high case compressor broke. In December 1992, the low case compressor had a vibration problem. What a high case compressor versus a low case compressor is insignificant in this case, so don't worry about it. Just know that a compressor broke and another compressor has a vibration problem. In May 1993, the vibration problem started causing severe enough issues that required a reduction of speed of the compressor train, which now impacts how much ammonia they can produce. Dresser recommended a modification of a fracture of a component that was causing this vibration problem a few months later. But in December 1993 and 3 years later, November and December 1996, the vibration problem was happening again, and the defendant just recommended the same repairs to the compressors, including the high case compressor. Finally, in March 1997, MCC had enough and they sued Dresser about 7 years after the first compressor broke. What did they request in damages? Well, to figure out what they request in damages, we have to understand there are three categories of damages that a buyer can seek in the event of a breach of warranty, which was their underlying contract case. On page 608, paragraph 4, it says that Mississippi Chemical Corp can seek direct, incidental, and consequential damages. The specific remedy that MCC was requesting was lost profits from the three different periods when the compressor train was malfunctioning and the ammonia was being produced, but at a diminished rate. So they're losing money. The big question is, well, are lost profits considered direct, incidental, or consequential? And this is us now big picturing where lost profits fits in our giant remedies chart. Well, lost profits are usually considered loss beyond value, sometimes consequential. But in some cases, if you're actually contracting for a specific service or a specific product, you might just lose profits by the contract being breached itself. Direct loss would be considered property damage to the compressor or any personal injury as a result of that negligent design, which we don't have here or we're not dealing with, right? We're just dealing with the lost profits. Incidental damages, which is the third type of damage that MCC could have requested, is any loss suffered when mitigating the losses due to the broken compressors. So any administrative costs or any little things that they had to deal with that's not lost profits or the direct loss of property damage or personal injury would be in the incidental category. So let's bring it back to our chart. Here, like we said, we have lost profits, which kind of isn't a category on its own because, again, it could be consequential or it could be an actual value damage. But again, in this case, we're dealing with loss beyond value. And consequential and incidental damages are both loss beyond value because we're not dealing with the actual property damage and personal injury. Loss of use, loss opportunity, those are also usually loss beyond value. And all three of these, loss of use, loss opportunity, lost profits, they can also be claimed in tort situations. Just most of our cases have been dealing with it in the context of contracts. So step number one, are compensatory damages for lost profits appropriate? Well, the answer here is, well, yes, because it's a type of consequential damage in this case, where any loss resulting from the general or particular requirements and needs of which the seller at the time of contracting had reason to know and which would not reasonably be prevented by cover or otherwise. And so here, they did have reason to know that they needed these compressors to create ammonia to sell products. And this part that they have in italics that's really small is actually dealing with a limitation, which is the foreseeability requirement, which we'll deal with later. Just knowing that they suffered some sort of harm because their product was not doing what it was warranted to do is enough to say that we have consequential damages, specifically the lost profits. which leads us to step number 2, which is how do we actually measure these lost profits? And this measurement showed up on page 590, where it stated lost profits are measured by the amount of profit the plaintiff could have generated if the plaintiff had not been deprived of the use of the property, less the amount of profit actually generated during the deprivation. So essentially, summarized is loss of profit is for lost sales due to damage or delayed goods. How do lost profits relate to loss of use damages? There are actually two distinct types of harm. Loss of use compensates the plaintiff for the inconvenience caused by the loss of use of the product or the property. Lost profits compensates for the loss of sales or income. The reason they seem similar is they both use the value of deprivation of the property to measure their damages. So their step 2 looks the same, but their step 1 is different. So you can still claim both of these as long as it's not considered a windfall where you get too much of one or the other. Now for our MCC versus Dresser case, how are these lost profits actually calculated? It's on page 607, paragraph 4, where it was calculated using the profit per unit of ammonia during each of the 3 malfunctioning periods, and it's multiplied by the quantity of ammonia lost in each of the malfunctioning periods. So essentially the amount that could have been generated if these compressor trains were working properly. Now the jury awarded MCC about 4 million plus in lost profits, but the defendant didn't like this and claimed that MCC shouldn't get this full amount for 2 reasons. One, MCC dipped into other sources of ammonia to make up for the lost production, which meant the damages should be limited to the replacement cost, not the lost profits. Because technically MCC didn't lose 4 million in profits since it was able to make some profit using its own inventory. It didn't need that extra ammonia that would have been produced by full functioning compressor trains. Now, what was the court's holding and reasoning, which is the response to Dresser's argument? The court held that this particular damage award by the jury was not incorrect because a reasonable jury, drawing all inferences in favor of MCC, could have determined the amount of damages awarded in this case was 4 million plus. The court gave 2 big reasons why it decided the jury award was reasonable. The first being that the court said lost profits from malfunctioning compressors is foreseeable. Dean knew if the compressors malfunctioned, the plant would shut down. Dean knew that ammonia was necessary to produce MCC products, and these predecessors often service these compressor trains for MCC. The second one's a little bit more complicated because here the court's reasoning was, or it implied, that MCC shouldn't have to dip into its inventory or that MCC is actually a lost volume seller. And so let's break down these 2 reasonings, starting with the lost volume seller first. Now, this idea of a lost volume seller is essentially if you are producing a product, if you have current inventory, as well as you're making new stuff using the compressor trains, you have profit opportunity both with your current inventory as well as the new product that's coming out of the compressor train. Let's do a visual. So we have inventory that's used to make products that is now sold on the market. We also have ammonia from the compressors used to make products that is now sold on the market. We assume as a lost volume seller, MCC could make both of those sales. However, when the compressors broke down, we no longer had that source of ammonia for the compressors. So MCC made the decision to use its inventory to continue to make products to make sales. However, that additional sale now disappears because we only have one source of ammonia. And even though that inventory is being used to supplement the diminished production of ammonia from the failed compressors, we're still losing profits because we're only making one sale instead of 2 sales. And so the court is saying MCC shouldn't have to do this. MCC should be able to have 2 sales instead of just one. And this kind of relates to the second point, which is the award should not be limited to the replacement cost of substitute sources of inventory. So the court said it's not limited to just the cost of cover. You can get the lost profits, especially if you're a lost volume seller. Because the D was arguing that a buyer cannot recover lost profits that have been prevented by cover or otherwise. This chart, again, we covered by using the inventory to still make the sales. The defendant said that that's enough. You should only have to pay for the inventory. But the court said, no, we should be able to give them the profit they lost from being able to make 2 sales instead of 1. But what you need to commit to memory for purposes of the exam is for step 2, lost profits R, measured by the amount of profit the plaintiff could have generated if the plaintiff had not been deprived of the use of property, less the amount of profit actually generated in the deprivation. And then, of course, remembering if you're a loss volume seller, the profit you could have generated is actually 2 sales, not just one. This case also dealt with limitations to damages, and we'll cover this more later, but I wanted to acknowledge it showed up on page 608, paragraph 5, where the paragraph talked about the seller needing to know at the time of the contract that the buyer would be deprived of the profits, that the profits are reasonably ascertainable, and that the profits could not be reasonably prevented. To simplify it, damages must be 1, foreseeable, 2, certain, and 3, not avoidable. So if you could have mitigated it and you didn't, you won't get those damages. But we'll review that in more detail later. And then we also had on page 599, take note, the definition of incidental damages, which is the cost to minimize other losses, both direct and consequential. Before we conclude this video, the last thing I want to mention is a skills point, which is what was the major issue and how did we know in this case? Well, again, lost profits was that major issue because that's all the court talked about. All the facts were talking about the lost profits, covering, not covering, using the inventory. We had a lot of stuff about limitations, but it was all rule-based. There wasn't a lot of factual analysis beyond that one paragraph about foreseeability. And so that's where I really focus on the facts and let those drive your analysis when you're reading the cases and doing exams so that you don't get lost in the shuffle for all some of those minor issues that will be worth less points.